Hey everyone, welcome to ScrapbookPal's YouTube channel. It's Gina and I'm here to share this fun Lawn Fawn Eclipse card. I'm using the Toucan Duet stamp set, the giant happy birthday to you die, along with the tropical leaves stencil. If you don't know what an eclipse card is, it's where you pop up a die cut sentiment with extra layers so that the sentiment really stands out. They're a great way to add subtle dimension to any of your cards, and I think it's fairly easy to do. I'm starting off with a piece of green cardstock cut down to an A2 size, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Using the tropical leaves, I'm going to be inking up several of the solid leaves with Evergreen Bough Distress ink. The goal is just to cover up my entire background with these leaves. There are 6 different leaves in this one stencil, and I'm using some masking tape just to cover up any of the edges that I don't want inked up. So Lawn Fawn had fit quite a few leaves into the stencil, and a slight downside is that you have to be careful not to ink up the areas that you don't want to add ink. So especially around the edges, because I am moving the stencil all around, I have to make sure that I cover up the edges so the ink doesn't get in areas that I don't want. The stencil also includes the patterns for the larger leaves. And for those leaves, I'll actually be inking it up with an embossing ink so I can heat emboss in gold. I actually took my heat gun to my background to make sure that it was dry. So if you are new to embossing, if your ink isn't dry on your background, your embossing powder will stick to it, because the idea is that you're using a very wet ink to hold your embossing powder until you heat set it. So I used an anti-static powder tool all over my card panel, and using the stencil, I lined it up and added the pattern using Versamark ink and covered it with gold embossing powder. Because I had the leaves all scattered about and turned about, I wanted to make sure that I heat set my pattern before I moved on, unless they were really far away. So these first two were pretty far away from each other, and I had no chance of accidentally smearing the ink or anything like that. But for any of the other areas where I would have to put the stencil over it again, I wanted to make sure that I heat embossed immediately. This just adds a bit of interest and texture to the background itself with the gold, and I really love it. I kind of sketched out how I wanted all the images to be and which images that I would be using from the Toucan Duet stamp set, and I already had the happy birthday to you kind of lined up on the middle just so I knew where all the animals could fit. So I will be stamping all the images using Gina K's Amalgam black ink on a piece of Nina Solar cardstock. Once I ink that up, I'm going to go ahead and color. For my coloring today, I was feeling kind of lazy, so instead of my usual 3 Copic markers, I'm actually just going in with 2. A trick of using Copic markers is that if you add additional layers on top of your color, even if you're using the same Copic marker, it does get darker. For my Toucan, I'm using C7 and C9, mainly because C9 is so dark and I just really didn't want it to be too dark, so that's why I went with the C7. For my darker color, I'm just laying down where I want the shadows to be and filling up the rest with the C5. So this is quite simple coloring, nothing too crazy. And I think that if you have colors that are similar to each other, you can use them as a pair for it. So I'm doing the same thing with all the other colors. I'm just using a darker color and a lighter color. The darker color will be where the shadows are, and then the lighter color will fill up the rest of the area. For the toucan's beak, I decided to go with pink, orange, and yellow because I just really think that combination is pretty. Here is where what I said about the Copic markers really comes into play. I'm using E55 and E53, and these colors are actually quite similar to each other. E55 does come off dark at first, and I lay down all my shadows. Then I'll take my E53 and blend out the rest of the area except for his spot. And you'll see that the colors are quite similar. They do blend together nicely. They are very close to each other in range, but I did want a little bit more dimension because there is so much space on this cheetah. So I'll actually go back in later after I color in the spots and add another layer of the E55 just to create additional dimension on the cheetah or leopard. I'm actually not sure which one this is. If you know, let me know in the comments below. I probably should have watched the Lawn Fawn video to know what animal this is, but I'm just really not good with animals. But I know that the birds are toucans, so, and that's mainly from Fruit Loops, I think. So yeah, I'm just not really good with animals. Anyway, so I go in with this E55 again and just go over the areas where I had added those shadows, and that creates a dimensional look for the cheetah. And I think that this is a really great trick, especially if you don't have that many Copic markers. You can still add and get that dimension that you need. So for the other animals, I'm just coloring them up quickly. I'm using the same method of laying down my dark color and then blending everything out with a lighter color. For the butterfly, I kind of wanted to incorporate the same colors as the beak of the toucan. I pulled in the pink and I pulled in the yellow, and then I added a pop of blue. I thought that that would go really nicely with my background. I did end up fussy cutting all these animals. There are coordinating dies. I'll leave a link below. For these animals, I just thought it'd be nice to have the lines cut up right against the black outline image. It wasn't too difficult. Lawn fawn animals are usually really easy to cut out, so I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I cut out the happy birthday sentiment, and as you can see, I cut it out of the green cardstock, and then I cut out 4 additional white cardstock layers for the die cut. I covered up my entire card panel that I'm going to place this green cardstock background on. I covered it up with adhesive. You can use glue if you want to. I just have a preference with double-sided tape, so I covered up as much of the area as I could. Because of the sentiment and the letters themselves, there were some areas that didn't catch onto the double-sided adhesive. So I went in with some liquid glue and just made sure that everything was glued down properly. Next, we'll be building our Eclipse card. I chose to do 4 layers of white cardstock just because I really wanted to pop this up. I kind of have a busy background with the leaves and the gold embossing powder. I needed more dimension to be able to have that sentiment stand out. Sometimes if you have a very subtle background, if it's a solid color, you could probably get away with 1 or 2 layers of dimension, but I went with 4. With my first layer, I just put down one of the white sentiments, and then I inserted all the little pieces for the letters in green. And you definitely have to make sure that you have all those little pieces, otherwise this card won't have the same effect. Basically, your sentiment is within your card, and it looks like it's just this entire background except the sentiment is popped up. And you'll see the finished product and you'll understand what I mean if you aren't familiar with Eclipse cards. For the rest of the sentiments, I had glued everything together, so there will be a total of 5 layers. 4 cut out from white cardstock, and then the 5th one is cut out from that green background we originally created. I use liquid glue for this because it's the easiest, because you have some time to move the sentiments if you don't have them stacked properly. Here we go. We stacked it and you can see the sentiment. It's super subtle, but in person, if the card is in front of you, you definitely can read the sentiment. For the animals, some of them I decided to pop up on these foam squares, and some of them I just decided to glue them directly onto my card background with liquid glue. For my little leopards, I decided to place them at the bottom, and then I will be placing the birds right on the top, chasing the butterflies, so I thought that that would be really cute. I also have the little iguana. He is going to live right on top of the U. The sentiment is a very obvious sentiment, and he's really small, so he doesn't cover up a lot of the sentiment where you can't understand what it's saying. And for, I think, one of the butterflies, I decided to pop him up, and then the other butterfly I decided to glue directly onto the card base, and I thought that that was really fun. That's it for today's card. I hope you enjoy it. I will see you guys next time with another video. Bye!